All right. Hello, World Civ. This is Iran Part 3. I imagine, as I'm looking at the sequencing of modules, that we'll do Part 4. Yeah, we'll do Part 4 on Thursday. And then Monday next week, we will do a review. We'll do it sort of connected via internet, but I will upload a module in which we do a review for our first test, which will be done, as I mentioned on Friday. It'll be done, I'll send out the actual email with the test, and you'll have that full day on Tuesday to do it and then send it back, whether it's a typed up answers on the actual sheet I send you, or if you write them down and then send them to me. Either way, that's fine. So anyway, that's what's on the agenda. That's what's on the schedule. I'm trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything for housekeeping. Most everybody's turned in assignments. Those of you who haven't, I think you've contacted me, and hopefully nobody's taking advantage of the situation and being like, oh, golly gee, no school? What? For 3 weeks later. And it's like, and I say that because I've had enough experience, like this ain't my first rodeo, 10 years teaching, that when a simple class grade is updated mid-class, students will come into my room and say, what happened? What's going on? So it's like PowerSchool is being updated. So for people to say after the fact, like, what, golly gee, I didn't know, it's a little disingenuous. So hopefully you guys can be on top of that. All right. Now, into our section, we left off last time talking about the current day politics and how Ayatollah Khomeini said that economics is for donkeys and all of that. And then when Khamenei came into office, they pushed hardcore into economics, or not hardcore, but they pushed more in economics. Oil, selling that as a rentier state. And from the late 80s on, that's what they've done. Okay, so we mentioned that last time. Now, for this time, we're going to go under Here Comes the Boom. So not on the first page, but the back of it, right, where it says Here Comes the Boom. There's one main thing you're going to write down. And then we'll get into civil society on like the second physical page of notes. I guess third if you count front, back, front. All right. So under Here Comes the Boom. Here's the main thing to take away from that is President Bush referred to Iran as an axis of evil, AXIS. President Bush referred to Iran as an axis of evil because they have repeatedly lied about enriching uranium. They have repeatedly lied about enriching uranium to both the U.S. and the UN. Keep writing here. The UN and the U.S. have asked and demanded they stop. But even with UN sanctions and U.S. sanctions, Iran is still creating a nuclear bomb. So, from the top, that chunk that you're writing down here is President George W. Bush, not George H.W. George H.W. is his father, Bush 41, the 41st President of the United States. 43rd, George W. Bush. That's my really bad impersonation of George W. Bush. He always had a very unique laugh, and sorry for humoring me, I guess, but he called them a member of the Axis of Evil, not the Axis powers back in like World War II, but he called this sort of this is post 9/11. He called them a member of the Axis of Evil, or an Axis of Evil, because they've repeatedly lied about enriching uranium, uranium. So the idea of this radioactive material, have lied about enriching this nuclear radioactive material. The UN has asked and demanded they stop, but even with sanctions from the US and UN, Iran is still creating a nuclear bomb. Okay, so what does that mean? I guess we should break that down a little bit more. first of all, after 9/11, the country as a whole was looking for enemies, right? Because these jihadists, specifically from Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, had perpetrated 9/11, but they wanted to like root out any of these potential terror groups. So in a not a State of the Union, but in an address to the country after 9/11, George W. Bush, as part of their the State Department and Defense Department, decided to come out, Homeland Security, et cetera, that there are certain things that we're going to be targeting. And they mentioned there are 3 countries specifically who are part of this axis of evil. Now, for 500 points, do we have Caleb? Any guesses? Nora? Any guesses? I wish you guys were here. But for those points, I'd ask at this time, which countries are included in that axis of evil? Yes, we have Iran, but there's 2 others. And they said North Korea, and to surprise of many people now, Iraq. A lot of people are like, what, Iraq? Why is that scary? Well, now it's not as much. I mean, still we have troops and stuff there. But Saddam Hussein was a dictator at the time, and we put them together, whether right or wrong, in an axis of evil. So the question then is, like, does this type of action from George W. Bush actually increase peace negotiations or solve relations between U.S. and Iran? No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. This only made things worse. But I understand, too, most people did after 9/11, you've got to draw a line in the sand and say who's with us and who's against us. And they refer to Iran as a member of the axis of evil. Pretty heady stuff. Now, enriching uranium, that's a specific term that we'll talk about a little bit more when we talk about the peace treaty and stuff, or the nuke treaty later on. I'm not going to tell you, like, how to make a nuclear bomb. I mean, you can look at it as the ideas behind it are rather straightforward. You hurl a chemical explosive, more or less hence the teardrop bomb from some of the first atomic bombs. But you would hurl a chemical explosive at enriched uranium or plutonium. So enriched uranium and plutonium, both of them are radioactive in that they have a half-life, right? But they're unstable. So when you're working with this type of element, this naturally occurring element, which you can harvest and excavate, when you're working with it, one of the hard things is it's radioactive. So it's unstable and it can be a carcinogen, and there's problems that you're going to be exposed to. But there's been about 13 countries in the world or so who have, I guess 13 confirmed, maybe more, who actually have a nuclear weapon or the knowledge of how to make a nuclear weapon, where they have finalized the process of enriching uranium and plutonium. It's sort of this big boys club where we have it, we're not going to tell you. And it could seem hypocritical. I mean, I'm not here to lie and say, like, that's right, the U.S. has got them, but Iran doesn't. There were non-proliferation treaties signed, but as we know, international law is as strong as a wet noodle. It's not very effective in forcing another country to do something or not do something, because we don't have some big Leviathan power forcing everybody not to do it. Iran, yes, has Sharia. Iran, yes, is a theocracy, and maybe that's why they're a little bit more scary. Yes, they have had, since the inception of the Ayatollah Khomeini, strained relations with the United States, because the U.S. backed his opponents, right? So that means the friend of my enemy is my enemy, if you want to look at it that way. So Iran, right when they turned into a theocracy, very much turned around and said, America's a great white devil, et cetera, et cetera. And so the U.S. and the Iran have not had good relations since then. The leaders, I should say. So that means that Iran has definitely since then been trying to enrich uranium and plutonium in the attempt of building a nuclear bomb. Their biggest, for a couple points, anybody know? Their biggest rival is going to be Israel in that matter. Israel and Iran, I think Israel is even more of an enemy to Iran, if you will, than the U.S. The reason why the U.S. is also an enemy is we back Israel a lot. So Israel being a predominantly Jewish country versus Iran, an Islamic country, you look at the two comparison points, and it's big sibling rivalry. And so they're trying to make a nuke. We say, no, 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 no. The UN says, no, 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 no. And we give a lot of slaps on the wrist saying, no, here are sanctions. Now, there's a couple words here that you might need to, in the margins, explain that it is George W. Bush. You could also mention enriching uranium as, like, nuclear weapon. Like, that's that's the nugget, if you will. That's why every country in the world doesn't have the capabilities of having a nuclear weapon, because finding the correct process that's somehow stable but unstable enough to create the chain reaction in a nuclear weapon, enriching uranium and plutonium, that process will not be found online. That's the nugget that Iran's been trying to literally figure out for the last 2-3 decades, to no avail. To no avail. Some say Russia's under the cover trying to give them help, but that's murky at best. Bottom line is they don't have it yet. They don't have it. And the U.S. has done in every attempt in possible way to block it. So enriching uranium is making nukes. Sanctions, that's a word that a lot of people get stuck on. It's basically a tax or a reverse tariff in a way, where the U.S. and UN or even European Union, EU, will come out and say, Iran, you're being naughty, you're breaking this international treaty and this international treaty, and you're being so naughty that we're going to put on a sanction on you saying, if any country in the whole world wants to buy oil, crude oil or whatever from Iran, which is their main source of income, then you've got to pay double or triple the amount as you would if you were to buy it from Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Nigeria or Mexico. And how is that enforced? Well, the UN tries, the EU tries, but it's more of like a gentleman's agreement that you're not going to go and buy oil from those countries or that country that has sanctions on it. If you do, you have to pay more money on that. And that way it economically chokes them out. And Iran, especially in the early aughts, 2011 to 2013, really leading into Rouhani's term as president, man, they really struggled. They really struggled economically. Even Ahmadinejad had to agree, they struggled. So that's the thing we got there for Here Comes the Boom. I think from 2013 on, Rouhani has tried to improve it and saying, can we improve relations with the European Union, with the UN, with the US, so that we're not getting choked economically. Again, you might be a very haughty and good football team who has an amazing quarterback. Somebody from your school is an amazing thrower, passer, but you got to have somebody to pass it to, or you got to have maybe a couple other weapons, or else if the defense just collapses on that one quarterback, your team's done. In this case, Iran's quarterback is, you guess it, oil. If you cut off oil revenue, the country is done. It's similar to Nigeria in that they build it all off of oil revenue. They're not really big on tourism or anything, it's just oil. And if you cut that off, they're going to hurt. And that has brought them to the table, so to speak. So since 2013, Iran's been trying to negotiate some things. But we're going to get to it in our last section, so on Thursday, how that has figuratively blown up. Pun intended? Okay. Let's see. Now, on the second physical page, the third front, back, front, if you want to look at it, under civil society, there's 3 things you're going to write down in this section. The first one is there are some Kurd and Arab minority groups in Iran. So there are some Kurd, K-U-R-D, and Arab minority groups in Iran. And they also happen to be Sunni, S-U-N-N-I. So there are some ethnic and religious differences, but they are few and shallow. All right, so there are some ethnic and religious differences, but they're few and shallow. So what does that mean? There's Kurd and Arab minority groups. All right, those are going to be ethnic cleavages or differences. We mentioned that term on Friday. It's sort of a weird term, but political scientists talk about when the country is sort of splitting up. Some Kurd and Arab minority groups. Kurd is going to be the Kurdish people. They're going to be hailing from parts of Turkey, the old Ottoman Empire, and are vestiges and holdovers from that. So ethnically, they look a little bit different. Their culture is a little bit different. Doesn't mean they're bad, but in Iran, that really makes them stick out like a sore thumb. But even then, they're not a ton of them. There isn't like Nigeria, where there's this big, coinciding cleavage that splits the whole country apart, where it's like a 50-50 split or 55-45 split. For Iran, it's mainly there's the Persians. They speak Farsi, not Arabic, and and they're Persian. That's their ethnicity. Boom. They look different from what you think of Arabs, and that's the other minority group that's there, but not as much, sort of on the periphery. There are Arab minority groups who are from Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia don't usually get along either, even though they're both Islamic. For man, this would be like a 15-point question if anybody knew this, that in the Western world's Christianity, there's a main division between Protestants and Catholics, right? There's a main division between those two. Catholics are those who, you could say the OG church, if you will. And then Protestants are those who protested against the Catholic Church and broke off and did splinterings. You could assume categorically that the Latter-day Saint Church is going to be part of the Protestant ideas, even though they're sort of in between. Hence, unfortunately, their designation at times by certain countries as a cult, because they don't know what to do with it, because it doesn't fit that normal mold. But that's neither here nor there. In the Islamic world, there's two main sects, meaning divisions, S-E-C-T-S, and that's going to be Sunni and Shiite. Most of the Islamic world is Sunni, in which they lost their succession of leaders, and they said, we don't need to have that still line of Muhammad down. We'll just go with different leaders. No big pope of the Islamic world. Okay, you could almost liken that to the Protestant idea. In a way, it's a loose analogy. The Shiite religion is going to be focusing more on, we had the hidden imam or the hidden ruler that after 11 different cycles of it, we lost them. We don't know where they are. So looking for this successive leader to come into place, who is this imam or leader. In the meantime, the Shiites have agreed that they can have interim head coaches. I'm sorry for butchering religious sensitivities here. That's not the intention. But for high schoolers, to help them understand the divisions in the Islamic world, I'm trying to use analogies that make sense. So in this case, Sunni and Shiite, or Shiism in this case, is going to look for a proper leader. And it's similar to a football team where they'll fire mid-season or they'll lose a coach mid-season. And they're not willing to yet say, this is our official head coach going forward. So they designate some person to be the step-in, fill-in interim leader, and that's what the imam or the ayatollah is in Iran. It's the fill-in leader until they come. So similar Quran, all those teachings, Sharia can be followed in Sunni or Shiite. The main difference is choice of leaders. Shiite's very strict in saying we have a succession that we're going to follow, and the hidden imam, this leader, will in a second coming type thing come out, and we don't know when or where or how, but that line will be hundreds of years later revealed. That's a different take. Sunni is saying we have our religious leaders, we don't need to wait for Muhammad's line, we're going to be good without it. So there are, just be aware that first thing you've written down is there's Kurd and Arab minority groups, and they also happen to be Sunni, right? So that means there are some ethnic and religious differences, but they're few and shallow. This isn't some huge big divide. They're mainly you're Farsi, mainly you are Shiite, which is a funny way, you can make fun puns about that, but it's, you see pronounced or spelled S-H apostrophe I-T-E or S-H-I apostrophe I-T. I mean, I've seen it romanized a couple ways. But the Shiite faction is there. That's the prominent one. There are a couple things on the periphery, and they've gotten okay with them. There is another minority that I won't test you on that is really, unfortunately, ostracized and not involved in politics. They're not allowed to be involved or vote, and they're the Baha'is, but you don't need to worry about them. Kurd and Arab do exist, but they're not as many, or it's not like a third of the country. Okay. The second thing that you're going to write down here for civil society is, and this is a good example of democracy increasing, one important interest group is called Workers' House, which represents factory workers. One important interest group is called Workers' House, which represents factory workers. We take for granted interest groups, and I would ask, what are interest groups? And hopefully you'd come to the conclusion that an interest group is a group of people who work together on a specific cause. A political party is just a big thing. They're trying to run for office, and they've got a lot of different ideas. If you were to take one of those ideas, that's going to be called an interest group, one of those ideas. And Iran, to their credit, has some interest groups where it's a voluntary association. The government hasn't said, you've got to be part of this group. The moment the government forces you, it's not really an interest group anymore. It's a government-mandated body. So Workers' House is an example of a voluntary association. And so that works. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's it. Just make sure you're aware, like hint, hint, hint on the test. Examples of them democratizing or getting more democracy. Workers' House is a good example. Okay, the third and final thing you'll write down in this section. Some free market ideas have been used. Specifically in 2010, the government removed electric and gasoline subsidies. In 2010, when the government removed electric and gasoline subsidies to match market levels. Okay, we mentioned about statists and free marketers. Statists say state controls it, whatever they say. Prior to 2010, the state did control for Iranian citizens gasoline and electric prices. And this is heavy stuff. Some kids might be getting super lost. Like, what's a subsidy, Peter? I don't understand. A subsidy is when, for instance, if the normal cost for gasoline right now would be like $2.40 a gallon. If our government stepped in and said, whoa, look, we got a lot of oil. We got your back. We're going to make it to where you as a citizen only pay like $1.30 per gallon, and we'll make up the rest. That rest is called a subsidy, where you're not actually paying what it actually costs. The U.S. doesn't, we've got some oil reserves for emergencies, but we haven't tapped into a lot and probably won't either. We're not Iran. We're not Canada. We're not Mexico, where like you have more oil reserves. And so for Iran for a long time, they had so much oil, they just made it to where it would cost less for their citizens. Same thing for electricity. They said, And electricity is the same thing. You use the natural resources to turn turbines to generate electricity, so they're going to make it for the Iranian citizens a little bit better. But from 2010 on, the government said, well, we don't have money. Think about it. Make the connection. Why are they struggling? Ding, 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 ding. Sanctions. They are struggling because they're not earning as much worldwide from their exports. So they have to then go to the people and say, look, guys and gals, we can't cover it. So we're going to remove a lot of these subsidies from electricity and from gasoline. You have to pay full market price. Now, this is very harsh because once you take an incentive away from people, it's human nature. Political scientists call it the Ratchet Theory, where you, like in a ratchet, you can stop, you can go forward, but you can't go back, right? If you've seen a ratchet mechanism when you're not like a ratchet girl, like, hey, not that bad, but like a ratchet that goes forward, and stops, like a tightening ratchet. Government historians, political scientists say that individuals react that way when it's called a ratchet theory, in that you give people an incentive, and even if for good reason you have to take it away, people still go upset and angry. That's just how we are, rational human beings. We still react that way. Heck, you guys have pack hour, which is a unique advantage. When you take that away, if that ever gets taken away, not that I think it will, but if it were, for many of you who use it as an hour-long lunch, man, it'd be ballistic, fires in the streets and stuff, right? Because you've gotten used to it. I think even when we bounce back and come back maybe next year or whatever from this time, or if we come back for a week or something at the end of May for like a shell of a graduation, getting back in the groove will be very hard because we're not used to that. That's how the Iranian people felt, where they had this incentive and it was taken away. Imagine paying double what you've been paying for gasoline. Even if it's for good reasons, the people are going to be upset. And that's what happened. So those are some free market ideas. To their credit, we'll get to Mexico. We think the PRI party actually did that, but they came under a lot of fire from the people, maybe wrongly, even though it's a good thing for the country to not be involved in the market as much, because then inevitably you'll have to pull out and people will get upset. So you shouldn't do it from the get-go. It's like having a babysitter who's not helping your children actually get ready for sleep at night and making them stay up till 3 in the morning, the kids might like the babysitter, but it's not a good babysitter, right? So that's the idea. Okay, so we've got that for Here Comes the Boom, Civil Society, those 3 things. Our next thing is we'll get to the next Star Wars trilogy. Ha ha ha. Remember the analogies I made to the whole like empire, and you had this empire led by the Emperor Palpatine and like the right-hand Darth Vader person. The question then becomes is the next Star Wars trilogy. The jury's still out, honestly, about this current Star Wars trilogy that just came out, right? This is deemed the next one. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it worse than the prequels? Is it better than the prequels? Is it this, worse than the original trilogy? Similar to Iran, we have questions of is Rouhani, this new Kylo Ren type person, is that better or not? All right, so those are the notes. Thursday we'll get through and finish up Iran in part 4. And then we'll do the review for the test on Monday. I will give a big email on Monday for everybody saying, okay, as you all have heard, school in Utah for K through 12 schools will be still in this dismissal status until May 1st. And so we are set up. We've got the YouTube modules. We've got the emails. So that's what we're doing here, right? We're avoiding using, I am, just to be clear, avoiding using Canvas because I've had too much student feedback that everybody else's classes are all on Canvas, which is great. That's great. But it seems so sterile and void of any contact because having them on Canvas with like due dates 2 weeks ahead and saying like, good luck, kids, seems very much disconnected. So that's why I'm trying to do these YouTube modules to feel like you have some connection with me. I wish I could see you guys. Google Hangouts are limited to the number of people you can see. But give a thumbs up. Yeah. If you like the YouTube module, I guess. But that's why I'm doing it. No, you won't see this on Canvas. It's going to be direct contact through emails back and forth like I've given students. So it's a little more directed and connected as opposed to just a Canvas thing. I've done it for debate, that's fine. But for these classes, I think it's a little more interconnected. Hence me doing it as opposed to like the traditional Canvas format. Anywho, we're going to be in it till May 1st. And I will send an email out on Monday just updating, okay, here's what we're going to do until May 1st. It's the same style, lather, rinse, repeat. Modules, follow along, we'll have assignments, we'll have tests. Monday will be our review, and then Tuesday I'm going to send out to everybody the actual test itself, and then on Tuesday, by the end of the day, you're on your honor to turn that back into me via email. And you're on your honor not to look at notes or other sources or mom and dad and just study up and then take that time, the time suggested is on there, and knock it out. So that's the plan. Some of you are asking, well, Pierre, I was curious. We turned the travel agent assignment in, but who is that guest speaker that was planning to come? So I was trying to do 2 birds with 1 stone. I made a commitment to my debate team last year that if they won state, so the year before, if they won state, then I would like, or if they won region, then I would do like the Blazing Challenge at Buffalo Wild Wings. And I was true to my word. The year after I did it in pack hour, and it was horrific. I don't know how anybody does that, and oh my gosh, it was like right around Christmas break. Intestinal problems. But last year I said if they win state, then I'll dye my hair, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. I got to do that at some point. And they're like, wait, Pierre, when are you going to do it? And then also the guest speaker or the guest presentee, the person you're going to present to. So I was going to traumatize all of you with a lovely thing of not just a Dora mask. Wee! Oh yeah, you're going to present to Dora. Oh yeah, that isn't creepy at all. With a little bit of that 5 o'clock shadow underneath. That's nice. I was not only going to do that, but I was also going to have a black wig because I'm brown hair, black wig. It satisfies it, debaters. All right, so Kayla, it would have been good enough that I dyed my hair. It's close enough. I would have satisfied that and traumatized all of you in the process. Thankfully, COVID-19 reared its ugly head, and you won't be traumatized that way. So that answers the question of who was the person we were going to present to. there. And that was also for the debaters. So Caleb as my witness, and Kayla and Blake, you guys can help spread the good word of like, yeah, Gordon was going to do it as the guest presenter as Dora with a black wig. There you go. All right. So that promise has been kept. All right. Have a good one. We'll see you on Thursday.